Mic check, 1, 2, 3. Mic check, 1, 2, 3.
All right, Jeff, you ready for this?
Yep, let's do it.
Insights at Work podcast jingle. Take 1.
It's where you get your insights. Insights at work. Nailed it.
Is this a joke? This guy for real?
Inspiring creativity in the workplace. That's what we're talking about today. This is the Insights at Work podcast.
Insights at Work podcast jingle. Take 27.
It's about work. It's not about sports. Insights at Work.
Oh, man, this is going to be a long day.
Let's dive in. I'm Jeff Livingston, and this is Insights at Work, the HR podcast that looks at what's happening in the HR world, takes your questions and studies the research to help HR experts move forward. It's prepared by HR experts for HR experts. In today's episode, we're chatting with Ken Hughes, YouTube thought leader and highly sought after speaker on disruption, change, AI, and innovation. Calling in today all the way from Ireland, home of acclaimed actor Liam Neeson, who's played essentially the same role for the last 15 years. Whether it's a retired CIA operative, hell-bent on revenge, or a retired jewel thief, hell-bent on revenge, or an Alaskan snowplow driver, hell-bent on revenge. Well, you get the idea. Ken, welcome to the Insights at Work podcast. What are your thoughts on Ireland's national treasure, Mr. Liam Neeson?
I feel that I'm the younger, more attractive version, I think. I think I'm the only person, maybe, as an Irish man who thinks, like, I've got teenage kids. I think if I was in one of his movies and they kidnapped my kids, I'd probably just say, yeah, keep them.
Well, Ken, maybe you too have a unique set of very special skills. So I'll be sure to stay on your good side today. I have never had so much fun researching a podcast before. You've got this amazing YouTube channel where you share quick videos about everything from consumer experience to employee experience to what we're talking about today, inspiring creativity in the workplace. In fact, I learned a new term when watching your TED Talk, and that term is Playologist. Now, most of us have a vocabulary of about 20,000 words. And since the beginning of the pandemic, because of all of the disruption we've seen, we've added 10,000 new words to our vocabulary. Now, think about that. That's half of what we're typically working with. Maybe playology is one of those new words. I know it is for me. So, for those out there who might not know what it is, what's a playologist?
Yeah, a playologist is someone who uses play, like any ology. It's an area of academic interest that uses play as a vehicle to expand what we're talking about today, for instance, in the workplace, but also creativity, innovation, personal development. I use play in personal development work. So I became fascinated by play. Again, I have teenage kids now, but they were obviously young. And children have this innate curiosity with play, and same with animals even. Play is used to explore your environment. Play is used to test boundaries. Play is used to balance risk and reward. And unfortunately, in our modern society, probably dating back to the Industrial Revolution and the military and school systems, around the age of 6 and 7, we start to stop children using play and we introduce rules. So if you give a 4 or 5-year-old a ball, they will just go crazy and kick it all against everything. But then suddenly we say to them, no, there's goals and there's rules and there's whistles and there's the offside rule. Yep. No one understands that really, but there you go. And so same with an instrument. If you give a kid a piano, they'll just bang it and they'll make sounds. But then suddenly we say, no, there's musical notes and there's chords and you must do this. And even in English we use the word play to describe theater. You go to see a play, but even there's a contract. There's you don't get to stand up in the middle of the audience and join in. And if you did, the actors would be very surprised. So we have a version of play in modern society that isn't explorative. it's within the box of rules that we formulate. And if you jump all the way forward now into the workplace, what we end up doing is we take, and this is very much like Ken Robinson's very famous TED talk, about why school has killed creativity. We end up with an employee ultimately who has gone through a kindergarten, school, university system and come out the other end with any form of curiosity, play, or mischief being wrung out of them. And at some point we learned that play is the opposite of work. And you probably can date back to the Protestant Reformation, and where basically any kind of leisure was seen as bad and hard work was seen as good. And so we have ended up in this very, very negative situation where people are not encouraged to think outside the lines. People are encouraged to do what work expects of them and not play. Now, as researchers, we understand that play is actually where the innovation lies. And so we get this really weird, hypocritical situation where we expect great things from our employees in terms of creativity and innovation, but then if we see them playing, we get very upset.
So, Ken, it sounds like allowing oneself to play, whether in life or in the workplace, helps to expand boundaries and open oneself to new things. You have a talk called the Innovation Sludge, and you describe it as a time when maybe we're firing on 2 cylinders rather than 4. Or here in North America, well, we'd be firing on 4 cylinders rather than 8. When I watched the video, I kept thinking about how so many of us might not be innovating because we're finding ourselves in a bit of a rut and we're not searching out those opportunities to be creative. We're seeing an increase in presenteeism and another new term called the hidden resignation. And that's really all about the worker sitting back and just accepting things and letting things happen. So let me ask you this. How have we gotten to this point? And in the workplace, what does creativity and innovation look like?
Okay, well, to me, I think, well, firstly, I mean, really simplistically, creativity is having these wonderful ideas, and innovation is applying those ideas to some kind of product, service, or process. Right, so that's the kind of definitions, right? So, there's no point in having great ideas unless you can apply them, and there's no point in looking at processes and getting them better unless you're actually putting in new ideas into them. So, people often, I think, mix up those two words a lot, and they use them interchangeably, and that's not right. So, for instance, you don't have to be very creative to have innovative applications. So you can actually, come up with new ways of doing things, new ways of addressing business models and new solutions without being particularly creative. But then creative people tend to look at the world very, very differently. And it's difficult to get step change innovation unless you really inject some significant creativity into it. The innovation sludge term that you bring up there. So I've been looking at the captive economy for the last 2 years. So this is the world that we lived in for the last 2 years. So businesses were really held in captive. And when the pandemic kicked off, I just became I'm a behavioralist. That's what I am. I'm fascinated by human behavior, by the way the mind works, by anthropology, by cyber behaviorism, how we live our lives online, how that impacts our physical day to day, and just fascinated with humans. And so for me, I was probably one of the only people in the pandemic that woke up every morning rubbing his hands with glee, thinking like, oh, what's going to happen today? So watching everything that we know fall apart, watching how we work, how we live, how society functions economically, politically, technically, just the changes were fascinating to me. So I've had a great last 2 years from a research point of view. And so one of the first things I did was started looking at the psychology of captivity. So the psychology of incarceration, the psychology of slavery, the psychology of when you remove someone's freedoms, what happens? And from an employee perspective, I became very interested in the idea that we were, we were taking people out of the office and we were making them work from home. That's pretty simple. But then the knock-on effects of that long term are that you're closing down people's stimulus.
Well, you conducted an experiment, and it's pretty famous, and that's what prompted your TED Talk. In this experiment, you injected stimulus into your daily routine, and it had some amazing effects. Ken, can you talk a bit about your really, really interesting experiment?
So I turned 47 years ago. Quick math will give you my current age. And having a little midlife crisis, thought, right, what will I do with my 40th year? And I was feeling a little bit kind of stuck in the routine of life. And so I decided on the 1st of January that year to do something new that day that I'd never, ever done before. And then I started thinking, I wonder how long I could keep that going. And so I decided, like any stupid male ego thought, to bite off more than I can chew. And I thought I'd do a year. I'll do a full year where 365 days in a row, I would do something new every single day, something that I'd never ever done before, had to be brand new. And in that, surely I would awaken some kind of creative spark or kind of new way of looking at the world. And so I set off, and what quickly became apparent was that if I didn't put something in the journal by midnight, I failed the experiment regardless. Even if you missed a day, that was it, the whole thing was gone. So there's kind of this pressure that you have to keep going. And I discovered a magnificent, kind of beautiful thing that exists in the world of, we say no to so many things. We go around with our eyes closed so many times. We do the same thing every day. We live in the same places. We surround ourselves with the same people. And so actively searching for the new gave me a whole new perspective on life. And look, the TED Talk is there, so your listeners can go off and watch the TED Talk in their own time. But that reality stayed with me forever. So the idea of maximizing your hours, your days, always something new, always a new way of doing something. And there's always new ways of looking at the world, even surrounded in your own house right now, your own office right now, there are things you could do differently. And when I came back to the pandemic, I realized that the average worker, let's say, the average employee is now surrounded by the same stimulus continuously. So because you don't travel to work to and from, because you don't go to conferences or networking, and yes, we had virtual stuff and that was great, but you were limiting your stimulus in the top of the funnel, basically. So, visually, hourly, orally, all the stimulus that comes in every single day, thousands and thousands and thousands of stimulus come into your brain every day. They were being limited, and the ones that you were getting were being routinely repeated. You were surrounded by the same people, probably your immediate family. You were going nowhere. There was no travel. And so what requires our creative brain, and this is the kind of the gym analogy, I'm really surprised at people in the corporate world that expect to be creative walking into a meeting that requires it. So it's kind of like a muscle, your brain. You have to work the muscle to get it to be this wonderful creative thing. So you can't just expect to walk into a brainstorming meeting. And we do this all the time, Someone gives you a pad of Post-it notes and they say, all right, let's stick our ideas on the wall. And you're suddenly to become this amazingly creative person who's going to have all this flood of ideas in the next hour because it's a workshop. That's not the way creativity works at all. You've got to really train that muscle. So I did that for a year. I trained the muscle, and actually afterwards I became really more creative in my writing, in my businesses, in my personal relationships, and it had a huge effect on my life. Now, the pandemic took all that away from people. So what we've ended up with, and this is what I call the innovation sludge, you're kind of wading through, you're trying to get there. The companies still expect of you. We still want to be innovative. We want to be agile. We want to have the new. We understand it's important. The world is changing, blah, blah, blah. But the people themselves inside the innovation bus, they are firing, as you said, on way less cylinders than they used to, simply because the stimulus that they're used to having, those accidental conversations that you have on the underground or in an airport lounge, or, they're all stimulus that go in and suddenly it's very subconscious now, but it does challenge the way you think. The people that you meet accidentally often challenge your status quo. And without any of that, what we've got to is 2 years of thinking by yourself, for yourself, surrounded by the same team members. And that's also, back to your point about what may be driving the Great Resignation, because people are tired of the same people. I just want to see new faces. And so people are moving on. And people think, oh, there's something wrong with this company. But actually, what it might be is something's wrong with themselves.
So did you find, before you undertook your experiment, your 365-day journey, were you languishing yourself like so many of us are maybe right now?
No. So if I think back to it, I didn't do the experiment because of that. But looking back on it, the answer is yes, I was. So how do you know, how languishy you are from the outside unless you have the hindsight to look back on yourself? So I think I was doing well, business was going well, life was going well, I was tootling along, I was on the hamster wheel, it was fine. But until actually I challenged myself to think, well, actually, can you take fine and can you make it fantastic? And can you do that every day? Can you bring and a bit like when you start exercising, when you haven't been exercising in the gym for a while and you go back to it after a few months or years even, the first few weeks are hard. But then there comes a moment where in training of anything, the energy of putting into training, you seem to nearly get more out of your training than you do putting it in. And the same thing happens for creativity. There comes a point where the experiment wasn't hard at all. And you started to wake up every morning, rubbing your hands together, thinking, like, what can I do today? And what joy can I find? And there was an amazing amount of joy, a huge amount of play, a lot of mischief, a lot of risk. People often ask me things about that experiment. I still talk about it in the corporate world all the time. And they always want to know the big things you did, and of course, yeah, you do the big things, the naked bungee jumping, the skydiving, they're all the big things. But it's the small things that matter. It's the wet Wednesday that you're stuck in your office, that you have to find something to do in a space that you've always been in, surrounded by people that you've always been in. You've got to find something new that you've never done before. That's the challenge. And once you start accepting that challenge and doing things differently, then you awaken. And so, and you take that and you carry that forward and into every business problem, every interaction with people. And all you're looking for is there another angle here? And the more you train your brain to do that with the silly things, with the small things, when it comes to the big things, when it comes to big business problems, when it comes to personal relationship issues, you're always open to the other angle. It just opens the mind. And so what I was fascinated by with that personal experiment was that I would never have described myself as a closed-minded person. I would have always ticked the open-minded box if I was filling out a form. But I realized during the experiment that actually we all are. The word no comes out of our mouth often far faster when you're asked, oh, are you around to do this? Oh, I am, but look, I've got to pick up the kids from soccer, or I've got to meet, or I've got to work late. But actually, when you look at it, you've got time for everything. And when you start to move things around, and when you start to stretch your capabilities, it's a bit like love, You love your wife or husband, you have children, well then you love them too. It doesn't turn out to be a finite amount of love that wasn't stretchable. Same thing with creativity, same thing with innovation. There's time and there's way more space in your brain than you think for innovation. And as I said, it's a muscle. You got to train that. You got to train it outside the office. You got to train it in everyday life. And that's where the joy of life comes from. Employees who are happier stay longer, retention is higher, absenteeism is lower because people enjoy their jobs. And you can't make someone enjoy their job, unfortunately. But if we can open people's minds and get them into a place where they're excited about, or the work is exciting, and they see new opportunities, they will obviously stay. And again, go back to the Great Resignation point. That's what's happening. People are just jaded over the last 2 years, and they're blaming their employer as opposed to blaming themselves.
Ken, you're absolutely right. We say no all of the time. And having a 7-year-old daughter at home, well, I probably say no more than most. Now, you spent a year saying yes. What new experience that you said yes to might have seemed small at the time, but when you look back, had a huge and unexpected impact on you?
Okay, take one. I mean, there's obviously 365 examples. And by the way, the experiment was good. It was bad. It rewired me forever. I was married that year, and I got divorced 2 years later. So there was negative impacts to that experiment as well, because you started to look at all the aspects of your life and you started to challenge them. And there was other areas of my life that I wanted to challenge that I hadn't even thought I needed to challenge. There was one, I think, and again, it's quite a simple one, to do with my daughter. So she was around your kid's age, 7, 8 at the time, and she was painting her toenails. And I was watching her, and I just took my socks off, and I thought, here, paint mine there too as well. And so she painted each toe a different color, as a 7-year-old would. And I started laughing, thinking, like, God, it looks my toes are like Smarties. And I put my socks back on, and I thought, wow, how did I get to be like 40? How did 40 years go by and no one's ever painted my toenails? It seems a bit mad. And that was kind of an interesting thought. I thought, well, how many times have I been around nail painting? Probably hundreds. I don't know. I had a sister, I had friends, wow, and I never had it happen. And then I went to bed and I woke up the next morning. Of course, I'd forgotten that she'd painted my toenails. I swung my legs out of bed and started laughing because every morning I'd look at these crazy M&M toes, And I put my socks back on and I go about my day. And then at the end of the day, I'd take my socks off and I'd laugh again. I thought, this is hilarious. And so for 2 weeks, every single morning, every single evening, I had this little laugh moment because I could always forgotten they were painted. And to me, that was the whole purpose of the experiment, that you could change the smallest of inputs, but it would have a significant output. And for me, I realized that there was joy in the small things. And then I remember bringing my kids to the pool at that time, and I, of course, had forgotten that I'm I'm undressing in the male changing room with 2 little kids, and I'm getting these weird looks from other men. And I started thinking, like, wow, yeah. And now I'm challenging the system. Now I'm challenging prejudices, and I'm challenging, what people think of me. And I'm thinking, like, okay, I don't need to explain myself. Do I? Like this idea of challenging just the norm, and having fun with it, which is important. A lot of HR and employee experience is heavy stuff, and fun seems to have got wrong. And if we learned anything the last 2 years, it hasn't been fun. So, we have to have fun, because if we're having fun and if we're smiling and if we're laughing and if we're feeling something, and when you feel something, that's how connection is formed, whether it's connected to colleagues, whether it's connected to the brand you're working in. And so when work isn't fun, and this is back to our playology opening remarks, things get just routine, and basically routine is the enemy of innovation and creativity.
Ken, it sounds like your daughter inspired some creativity in you. During your experiment, how did you inspire creativity in others?
Yeah, and that was completely accidentally, by the way, because I did this experiment for myself. This wasn't a keynote speech, it became one afterwards, but it wasn't a TED talk. Again, it became one afterwards. But I was doing it for me, and around, I think, March or April, 4 months in, I removed myself from social media, because even there I found that I was kind of performing like a monkey for an audience, because I'd started to snowball. People were interested in what I was doing, and they realized Ken would never say no to anything. They would they would prompt me with, oh, here's what you could do today. And so I was kind of performing for them. And I thought, hang on, this wasn't the point of the experiment here. The point was for me. So I backed off that. But yes, it had a huge implication on it. So all my friends and family got involved a little bit, because it's difficult to watch someone do this without getting, it's infectious, when people are getting involved. And to this day, because that TED Talk, and by the way, the TED Talk never got dropped onto the TED platform, which is interesting, sadly for me. I was hoping it would. But it's, the hundreds of thousands of people that have watched it, it still has its own little audience. And I've never marketed it. I've never got, but, it finds people when it needs to find people. It's a lovely little thing. And not a week or month goes by where I don't get a message from somewhere in the world that it's touched at the right time. It's like a book. So, sometimes you read a book, and sometimes a book seems to find you at the right time in a crossroads, and it sets you off maybe on a certain way. The talk sometimes finds people like that. Now, lots of people just find it and think it's fun. Lots of people, try it for a week or whatever. But it finds some people at certain times and changes their lives, which is really kind of cool, completely accidentally. And I've yet to ever perform that speech with a live audience, because obviously it's a great live speech, where I challenge people and I challenge employees in terms of what they think they're capable of. And we break arrows with our neck and walk on fire and, all those mad things. There's a big workshop to do with it. But I've yet to ever do one of those sessions without someone coming up to me afterwards and just really, you can see it in their eyes that you've unlocked something. And that's joyous. This is the best part of my job, when you stand on stage and you inspire someone. Everyone else has had a good time, but there's always one or two people where it's hit a chord, maybe for whatever reason, whatever's going on in their lives, usually personally. And they realize, yeah, I needed to kick up the ass here.
Ken, talking about getting that kick in the butt, I think we all believe that the average is around 66 days or 2 months for new behavior to become second nature in our routine. How long did it take to see a shift in your perspective so that you were always starting to embrace and looking for new ways to be creative or new ways to let that creativity into your life?
Yeah, I would say 3 months for me, I think. I remember kind of around the 90-day, 100-day mark, literally kind of feeling the click. You can nearly even feel it physically inside of you, the change in perception, the kind of hunger for it. Now I'd put artificial pressures on myself by having that midnight limit of having to have written something down. My midnight was a pressure. And so I didn't walk past any notice board without stopping and seeing what I could do. And I ended up crazy things, crazy places. Ultimately, it's about just seeing the opportunity in the everyday and understanding that all around you at every given moment, there are opportunities to connect with people. There are opportunities to deepen relationships. There are opportunities to try things you've never tried before. And that until you start doing that, how will you know how far you can push yourself? I remember I was at a yoga retreat once, and the yoga teacher had us in this particular warrior pose, and she was pushing us as far as she could. And she said, so bend forward. And, everyone in the room is at different levels, of course. So everyone's different body shapes, and everyone's got a different center of gravity. And so she said, you're each going to have to find your own point here, but there'll be a point where you all fall over. I want you to find near that point, please. So we're all kind of going as far as we can. We're just wobbling. And she said, right now, find the edge, find the very edge where one little bit more, you'll fall over. So we all do that. And then she said, right now that you're there, I want you to fall over. So go the whole way. And then as we all, leant in to go fall over, and we did, but we all realized that there was another 5% between the place that you thought you were going to fall over and the place you did fall over. And in that, for me, there was just a mind-blowing moment where we all think that we've done enough, or we all think we've gone as far as we can. But actually, when you lean into absolute risk, when you think, okay, look, I'm going to fall over, so it doesn't actually matter, you actually had a little bit more of safe space before you did. And so how much do we hold back in our personal relationships, in our employee motivation, in all that kind of area, are we giving it our maximum effort? And I don't think we are.
Ken, I keep thinking to myself, are we forcing people to be creative? How fair is it to ask people to be creative in the workplace? I mean, what are your thoughts on the corporate retreat?
Creativity doesn't really ever get forced. Nobody sits down and let's say go to the extreme of the creative arts. Nobody sits down and writes a play or an opera or paints a picture under pressure of a 4-hour deadline and comes up with a masterpiece. That's just not the way creativity works. You can bang out a PowerPoint presentation probably in a few hours, but creativity needs time. It needs to filter and brew. And so sometimes when I'm writing a piece, I have an idea for a blog, or I have an idea for a thought leadership piece, and I'll write a version of it and I'll put it away again and I'll go for a walk. So I come back to it back and forward over maybe weeks before I kind of think it's ready for maybe what it could be. Unfortunately, in the corporate world, we kind of make our people jump through hoops of deadlines, and then it's kind of some kind of forced creativity where, no, you must be creative now. This is the brainstorming workshop. So I think we need to give time. And again, going back to male ego, I think men want the deadline. They want the kind of thing, whereas women generally are more happier with it will emerge, it will form. Definitely getting out of the routine and getting away from the office is important. Mixing with new people that you maybe otherwise wouldn't mix it usually is very important. I mean, Steve Jobs famously designed the Apple office in its second or third design with very thin corridors that kept meeting each other, forcing people to meet in the corridor. So basically, there was little kind of standing spaces off the corridors, but they were designed in a way that you would bump into people, and then conversations may happen. And that's the way innovation gets kicked off. And that was a strategic decision. I love that in architecture. So I'm a fan of it for those things. But then there's also a very 1980s, 1990s, let's all go paintballing and hit each other model, which is so broken, which is just forced fun, and no one really wants to be there. And so, I mean, asking your employees what they want and how they want to spend those retreats is interesting. So we're heading into a big health and wellness trend globally. People don't want to go drinking and shoot each other with paintball anymore, and have these ridiculous team building tasks that are kind of, they're interesting, but they're not great. People do want to come away from those things with something personal themselves, having challenged themselves personally. And so, I run those, and I'm often invited in on them on behalf of the corporation to help them with those retreats. And that's where we do the fire walking and the glass walking. And so we send people home with a sense of empowerment, something that they've achieved they never would have thought they were capable of. And we've challenged their norms, and that's enough, challenge their norms and send them home. So no, I am a believer of it, but it needs to be done much better. It needs to be a bit more authentic and less kind of pushy.
I think when we're talking about increasing resiliency and introducing creativity into an organization, recruitment is an important part of this. And you've got a blog called Releasing Your Inner Chaos Ninja, and there's a focus on recruitment in that blog. Can you fill us in on the concept of that inner chaos ninja?
Netflix have a very famous phrase called the chaos monkey. And they wrote chaos into their servers, into their systems, to say, well, what would happen if the whole system goes belly up, And so they kind of put bugs into the system on purpose to go crazy in the system, to see that when those bugs brought the system down, were all their parallel systems that were there designed to keep the thing going. And so introducing chaos on purpose to see what would happen, basically. And I thought to myself, ooh, I like that. I didn't like the word chaos monkey because monkeys seem a bit crazy. So I thought chaos ninjas. Let's recruit chaos ninjas, right? Let's recruit people into the companies that don't fit our corporate culture. Because interesting, in the interview, what often happens is the candidate leaves the room or the screen, and the interviewing panel turns to each other, and the first question they'll ask is, yeah, they seem to match all the criteria, but does she meet our corporate culture? How will she fit in here? And if the answer is she will meet it perfectly, we hire her. Now, the problem with that is that we're hiring the same person again and again and again. So we have a cookie cutter approach to recruitment, which then again has one type of thinking, one type of creative analysis for our problems. What we need to do is actively think, does this person fit into our corporate culture? No, they don't at all. Excellent. Let's hire them. And so instead of looking for, I remember I joined Anderson Consulting, well, Accenture now, out of university. And I remember on the first day looking around the room at the kind of 7 or 8 of us who had been recruited to the strategy division at the time and thinking like, good God, we're like robots. As in, we're all kind of the same. We all have the same hobbies. We all have the same interests. We all certainly had the same grades. And I thought, like, oh my God, they're just recruiting I only lasted 9 months in that company actually, because that was the way the company was run. And again, you had the same minds working on the same business problems all the time. That was never going to end well. And so I think from a chaos point of view, what you need to learn as a leader and as a team manager is perhaps the people that don't seem to fit should be encouraged to stay. The people that don't seem to fit from a recruitment point of view, maybe you should take a risk on. And back to our conversation on creativity, maybe we should start recruiting just creative people, regardless of their qualifications university wise. Maybe we should just look for people who have a different way of looking at the world, photographers and artists and musicians. And because if you, one of my favorite things to do at big conferences is like with 1,000 people in the room is to ask how many people here play an instrument, how many people here paint and draw on a regular basis. And the answers are always scary, 10%, 5% of the room. It's because we're very logical people. That's the corporate world. That's a problem. So from a diversity point of view, don't just look at gender, age, and race. Look at the type of people that we're recruiting, and maybe just go out on a limb and recruit some crazy chaos ninjas.
You know what I love about your term, the chaos ninja, and your work behind it? It's that it's all about building this corporate culture that is innovative and creative and resilient for when chaos is going to happen, so they can handle it. So they've got those differing perspectives and they've got differing skill sets. So when chaos happens, because we all know it does, as we've seen in the last couple of years, they're ready to tackle that chaos. We have a ton of new things being thrown at us, new chaos, new disruption, especially with so many of us returning to the office. What tips do you have for listeners and HR professionals for what's about to come?
I was on a beach with my kids over the summer, and there was this sign saying, "Beware riptides." And the lifeguards were trying to explain to my kids the danger of a riptide. And a riptide will carry you straight out to sea. And what you start to do as a swimmer is you immediately try and get back to the shore because you're panicked, you're getting drifted away, and you start to swim against the current. Now, what you're trying to do is trying to get back to where you were, because that sounds safe. Now, the ocean, unfortunately, is stronger than you. So it'll just tire you out and you'd eventually die or get carried out anyway. So what you're supposed to do is swim sideways. You swim sideways out of the current. And then as soon as you're out of this rip current, you swim back to the shore. Now, the courage and vulnerability it takes to swim in a different direction than your survival, unfortunately, is done by very few people, which is why they have to train it and explain it to people. And in business and during the pandemic, I was fascinated by this because here we all were working from home, which was our new reality, but we were all paranoid about trying to swim back to the shore, trying to do the work in the same way, trying to achieve the same deadlines, but we weren't in the same place. We were now in a different place. So the courage to swim off in a different direction, basically. And that only comes from your leaders in your organization, I feel too, that we have to be allowed to move in directions that don't feel intuitively right, but they may be right. And that's explorative, and that's back to our conversation around play and risk. We have to be allowed push boundaries and see what happens and see, do we have the other 5% before we fall? If we keep trying to get back to where we are, then it's game over,
Ken, I have had such a great time today. What a great conversation. Is there anything that we haven't talked about, anything impactful that you'd like to share?
Coming out of the pandemic, we're all yearning reconnection, okay? We're reconnecting with self, reconnecting with society, with our teams, with our family, with our friends. And so I became interested in this idea of customer lifetime value and employee lifetime value. And this idea that we expect our employees to be thankful that they have a job, and we expect our customers to be with us all the time from a brand loyalty point of view. But we do very little in terms of the investment in that relationship. And we challenge organizations then with, well, are we doing enough to explain the Great Resignation, basically? Like, are we doing enough to connect with our employees in a relationship way? Yes, they do their work and they get paid for it, but that's just the hygiene factor. Are we doing the work as the employer? And I don't think we are. I think we just expect them to be happy that they have a job, and that's what's fueling a lot of the Great Resignation too. When people stood back from it and they thought, well, do I feel an emotional connection to this business, to this team? The answer was no. It's a very kind of authentic, empathetic space. And again, we're learning to lead with emotional intelligence as opposed to IQ. So it's EQ over IQ. And that work's really interesting. So doing a lot of great work with HR directors all over the world on just challenging the norm of how we lead and motivate people. And coming out of the pandemic, people are wide open for attachment. They are open for new ways. They're looking for new kind of ways to satisfy themselves. And so, yeah, it's a great time to be working with people.
Awesome. Well, let's hope that you're open to sharing just a bit more about your personal life. We always wrap up the podcast with our guest list of firsts and favorites. You ready to do this, Ken?
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm bad at these kind of things. Okay, go.
Ken Hughes, what is the first car that you owned?
The first car I owned was a Fiat Bambino 126 that my dad bought for me when I was 12, and we cut the roof off with a disc to make it a one-way convertible. I used to drive it up and down our cul-de-sac with 10-year-old children in it illegally. Thinking back on it, health and safety disaster. Like a 12-year-old driving a car up and down a cul-de-sac. But it was a great little car.
Well, Ken, I'm sure you knew this one was coming. What is your favorite Liam Neeson movie?
You see, you're assuming I watched them because I'm Irish. I would probably have to go political on this and say Michael Collins. He played Michael Collins in that very famous movie, and I have family on that side of the equation, and so yeah, I think his way of playing Michael Collins was amazing. So yeah, that would be my favorite. And
Awesome.
his kids weren't kidnapped at all in that movie.
He wasn't hell-bent on revenge in that movie.
No, he wasn't. Well, he was hell-bent on overthrowing an occupying force, all right?
Ken, what was the first job you had?
First job I had, well, it depends. Entrepreneurially, I stole all my mother's magazines, apparently, when I was 3, put them in my little tractor and trailer, and cycled around the park selling them to other mothers for a penny, thinking that this was great, and my mother wouldn't notice all the magazines missing. So I was always an entrepreneur when I was a kid. Loved that. My first proper job, actually employed, was what was I? I worked in a chipper, a takeaway diner, making burgers and fries every summer for 3 years, and I've never eaten burgers since.
What's the first concert that you attended?
First concert that I attended, first big one was Prince. Prince came to the stadium locally, and we all went to see him. No one really knew who he was or what he was up to. And so in Ireland, we have this kind of, so I remember when Prince came, and we had our U2 at the time, this is the 80s, U2 were big and they were ours.
Of course.
And here was this weird American guy coming over thinking he could fill a stadium. So I think he ended up with like a big stadium. People going, yeah, who are you? We don't really know who you are. I don't think he enjoyed the gig much.
And last question, Ken, what is your favorite piece of advice that you give to a young professional just starting out?
I would say, oh yeah, good one. Seek less advice, I think would be my advice. I think people always kind of want to know they're doing it right, and they seek advice overly so to make sure they're doing it right. And I think we've got to where we are now by doing what we did. And actually, if we're going to shape the future properly, you're better off doing something new. So actually, I would say use your gut more than you trust, because I think younger people don't trust their guts because they assume, oh, well, there's people who are more experienced than me. There's people who've done it before. They must know. But actually, I think often that younger gut has an energy about it that has been forgotten by the older generations. And so, yeah, lean into play and mischief and risk and the energy that youth has automatically on its side about those things.
So be that chaos ninja.
Be the chaos ninja. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Ken, what a great way to wrap up a podcast on creativity and innovation. I have taken so many notes, and it's just been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on the Insights at Work podcast.
Jeff, it was an absolute pleasure, pal. I haven't enjoyed one of this for a long time. Good questions. See ya.
And with that, it looks like we've run out of racetrack. Thanks so much for listening to the episode. If you've enjoyed it, please share it with your friends and colleagues so they can benefit from it as well. If you find the Insights at Work podcast worthy, please go on to iTunes and give us a cool rating with a nice review. We certainly appreciate it. And if there's something that you would like me to discuss around this big world of HR and all things business, give me a shout. You know how to reach me on social media or through LinkedIn. In the meantime, stay healthy and be kind. We'll see you soon on the next episode of the Insights at Work podcast.